Hello and welcome to Life Matters. My name is Bob Joyce and I'm happy to host today. And we have a terrific guest. His name is attorney Nikolas. And Nick is the president and co-founder and general counsel of a group called the Bioethics Defense Fund. And in that capacity, Nick has traveled nationally and internationally giving lectures on issues of natural law and the integration of medicine and science and political theory and how they relate to general morals and public policy. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Nick. Nick, welcome to Boston and the Northeast.
It's great to be here, Bob.
Yeah. Could you tell our viewers where you've lectured during this visit to Boston?
In the last few days up to the Northeast, I've had the privilege of lecturing at Yale Law School, Harvard Law School. I'll be speaking to a Boston College, a philosophy class, and I'll be speaking to a group of Boston lawyers in a couple days, and I'm really looking forward to it. The Yale Law School and Harvard Law School talks, I think, went well. Had a very good discussion with some very, very smart students.
That's wonderful. And Nick, could you tell us a little bit about your background, your education, your work experience, and how you came to become involved in pro-life work?
Well, I'm a lawyer. Went to law school, have an undergrad and a master's degree in government international relations with a kind of a focus on political theory, political philosophy. After I graduated law school, I joined a very good firm in Phoenix, Arizona, a pretty good sized firm. But after 4 years of doing regular commercial litigation, I just felt a desire to do something a little bit more meaningful with my practice of law. You know, you only have one life. It's a relatively short life. You don't know how many days you're going to get. And I wanted to do something that I thought had some meaning. When I looked around at all the many issues out there, all very important, I thought the life issue is probably the single most important issue. If a person isn't born into this world, or if a person's life is cut short, then all the other rights don't matter, because you have to have a living being to have those rights. So I thought that the pro-life movement was very important, and I was very blessed to get a chance to do religious freedom law, but that kind of segued into pro-life law. So over the last 30 years of being a lawyer, I think probably 24, 25 of those years have been in the service of pro-life law full-time.
And at some point you decided to found or be a co-founder for the Bioethics Defense Fund. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about the Bioethics Defense Fund, what you do, how long you've been operating?
Well, the Bioethics Defense Fund is a public interest law and education organization. And we are dedicated, we practice full-time as doing pro-life law, dedicated to reestablishing the protection of human life from the beginning to its natural end. And we use a unique approach. We use a natural law approach. And what I mean by that is all human beings on the planet, everyone who's ever existed, we all share the same human nature. Notwithstanding our skin color or our religious backgrounds or our ethnic backgrounds, it doesn't matter. As a human being, we all share certain things that we cannot, the things that we have to know deep down. We may suppress them, we may not explicitly acknowledge them. As I always tell the law students, look, even a thief doesn't like to be stolen from. Or if you kill with impunity for a living, you're a hitman, but someone murders your wife, you react like every other human being would react, that concern for, you would know it's wrong for someone to murder your wife, even if you murder for a living. And so because we all share that same human nature, when we lecture at law schools or medical schools or to groups of lawyers around the country or around the world, we try to appeal to the reason that we all share, that human nature that we all share. And that's kind of the perspective we take.
I see. Now, I know in part of your experience, you've worked with members of the President's Bioethics Commission, and I know you've testified before the United States Senate on these issues, and I know you've counseled lawyers who are preparing their arguments before the Supreme Court. And could you tell us some of the specific topics that you've been involved in with that, and maybe weave in how the natural law comes into play in those types of issues?
Well, with respect to the consultation, litigation consultation that we do the things that any lawyer would do. We might talk about strategy or deposition ideas or whatever. The natural law really comes in when we're lecturing, because it's something that everyone knows, but they don't necessarily know the terms. And so I just spoke, like I said, at a couple law schools, and if we're talking about issues like human cloning or three-parent embryos, people don't know what to think about it, but we at least start with the natural law understanding that there's a moral question here, and it can't be ignored. It can't be marginalized or discredited. A lot of times you hear, well, don't impose your morality in the law. And that's a misunderstanding of law, because law properly understood does reflect the moral order. I'll give you the example of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose famous letter from a Birmingham jail where he says, I agree with St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas that an unjust law is no law at all, meaning that if you have a law, it really, properly understood, law reflects the true, the good, the beautiful.
Yeah, there was something, I know you mentioned, you make some reference to one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates in terms of the validity of law. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about Lincoln's comment in that case?
Yes, I don't have it memorized, but so one of the big issues before the Civil War was in 1803, President Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Purchase. And overnight, the United States territorially grew more than double in size. And the question was, all that territory west of the Mississippi, was it going to come into the United States as free states or slave states? Now the South, because they were for slavery, was concerned that all these states would become free states and upset the balance. So in the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, Judge Douglas, his view was, well, I don't care whether they vote slavery up or down, as long as they have the right to make that decision. But Lincoln, in the famous Quincy debate, one of the debates which you can look up, anyone can look up, basically made the point that, hey, Judge Douglas can't say that he doesn't care whether people vote slavery up or down unless he sees anything wrong in it. But if you say that slavery is wrong, you can't say that a person has a right to do a wrong. Now that's the natural law that Lincoln, brilliant as he was, intuited. That's the relationship between law and morality. If you have a law, it has to reflect morality. Otherwise, it's really not a law.
You know, it's amazing how much can be encapsulated in such a simple statement that you don't have a right to do wrong. It just says so much in a few words. Thanks very much to you, and thanks to good old Abe Lincoln. He's gave.
Yes, I'm just a reflection of someone else's genius. Believe me.
I tell many of the lawyers who I train and people who I talk with that Abraham Lincoln, everything I need to know, he knew. So he's a very good model for us. Yes. You mentioned cloning, and many people know of cloning of Dolly the sheep back several years ago, and I'm not sure whether or not people know what's happening in the world today with respect to human cloning. Could you take a couple of minutes and explain that process or those processes to us? Not the specific processes.
I can. It's complicated, but let me try to simplify it. So cloning is simply asexual reproduction. Now, when someone talks about sexual reproduction, the fundamental reality is you have both sperm and egg. You get half the genetic complement of chromosomes from the sperm and half from the egg, and when they unite in sexual reproduction, the new embryo, whether it's a sheep embryo or a human embryo, is that being that has the full genetic complement. Now, cloning, again, is asexual, meaning you have either not the sperm or not the egg. And basically, it's a process of reproducing the genetic identity of the donor you want to copy without using sperm and egg. It's much more complicated than that. I don't want to go through the process. If I had 20 minutes and a chart, we could
But the end result of the cloning process is a human embryo, if we're dealing with human.
With Dolly the sheep, of course, it was a sheep embryo, but if you applied the same technique that the Scottish scientist did when he cloned Dolly the sheep to a human embryo, you would have human cloning. And in fact, we used to say that someday in the future, when someone tries to clone an embryo or implant and birth a cloned baby, but there was an organization, we believe in Oregon, that has announced that they used the technique that the Scottish scientist did to get Dolly with a human embryo. Now, they didn't implant it and birth the child, but they did clone a human being at the embryonic stage of existence. And so we have crossed the Rubicon. And I think the brave new world, so a lot of people focus on life issues, they focus on abortion. That's the thing that pops into people's minds. And that's certainly very, very important. But there are all these other issues. What do you think about human cloning? What do you think about animal-human hybrids where you mix a little bit of animal DNA with human chromosomes to get a hybrid embryo? What do you think about 3-parent embryos that are coming? When I was in law school 30 plus years ago, the idea of all this was science fiction at best. So to the young law students out there now, as I said today to one of them, I said, what's the future? What's going to happen in 30 years? And even if people won't agree with us on the specific moral question, you shouldn't create an embryo, you shouldn't destroy an embryo, everyone in society has to be concerned about where we're going. In kind of the culture we have something that we term the technological imperative. It's very popular. Well, if science can do it,
I've heard that. Mm-hmm.
Right. If science can do it, we should do it. So if our technology allows us to clone or do this or that, we should do it. But as I always tell the students, physics can teach us how to build an atomic bomb, but only morality and ethics can tell you whether you should drop it. So again, you can't escape the ethical dimension of all this research. What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to live in human civilization? If we start cloning people into existence, where I think this could go, and I hope it doesn't, is the idea of designer babies. Now, what does it mean when one human being can create, to your specifications, another human being? So we talk about, the Dred Scott decision, horrible decision of the Supreme Court, where they treated a human being as nothing but a chattel, as a piece of property. The court in Dred Scott said Dred Scott could not be given the rights of a citizen under the Constitution because he was bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and profited wherever, trafficked wherever profit could be made. Now, that's the problem with all of these technologies. It was C.S. Lewis in his Abolition of Man, a great book I recommend for everyone to read.
Yes, that's a wonderful book.
Who basically pointed out that when we say men master technology, what it really means is that some men master other men with technology as its instrument. Right? It's never neutral. It's never neutral. And the kind of society where we all come together, so our theory of government, as you well know, is we come together and we debate the issues of the day, and then we vote. Now, hopefully we do it with deep reflection. All these biotech areas, this whole brave new world that we're here, is going to profoundly affect all of civilization, our children, our grandchildren. What does it mean to be a human being? Should we commodify some people? Kind of like manufacture them. And if we did, would they be treated like Dred Scott, a less than human being that we could just do whatever we want with? These issues are so important. And again, to people who are listening, thinking, well, we talk about pro-life issues or issues like this, bioethics issues. It's not just abortion. We have to get a handle on all these biotech issues. Not that we're against science. We want to be very clear, right? We're all alive because of modern medicine. But if we just say that anyone can do anything with whatever technology we develop, then we go down the road to totalitarianism or some society we won't like.
Sure. So it's very important that science respect human beings and that laws respect human beings, and the underlying principles there are principles of morality. I know in the Dred Scott decision, one of the shocking references, and no one would agree with the Dred Scott thinking in this day and age, but I remember them saying that that blacks, who were at the time referred to as Negroes, were of an inferior nature. And it was a shocking statement. But that same type of statement is being made at other human beings, although they be very small. They're fully human, 100% human, and alive and developing. And it's easy for that type of thinking to creep in to our thinking without us even being aware of what the real philosophical underpinnings of it
right.
are.
I think the quote you're talking about is, I think in Dred Scott, the Supreme Court said that a slave was such an inferior being that he had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. In some sense, we have people in society who say that the human embryo is such an inferior being that it has no rights that we in society need to respect. And again, it's clear as a matter of science, as a matter of simple embryology, that a new human being comes into existence at the moment of sperm-egg fusion. That's not debatable. We can debate whether we should protect that human being, but as a matter of just simply science. So people say, well, it's a religious argument to say life begins at conception. No. Science, embryology, tells us you have a new human being that begins at conception. Now, where religion or morality comes in is how should you protect it? I will be happy to say that my religious beliefs or moral beliefs say I shouldn't kill an innocent human being. And what science does is simply inform the discussion. Do you have a human being here or not? And I think that's a moral analysis that anyone has to ask.
You hear very often people come back and say, well, you shouldn't be legislating morality. You can't legislate morality. What would you say to a person who made that argument to you?
Well, I would say they misunderstand the nature of law or legislation. There's only two ways to look at law. Law is something that reflects morality. So again, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., letter from a Birmingham jail, an unjust law is no law at all. Why is it no law at all? Because it's not just. Meaning, the flip side, that to have a law, it has to reflect truth, goodness, justice. If it doesn't, it's really an act of violence, it's an act of force. And so you always have to ask the question, the English word law comes from the Latin word lex. And the Latin word lex comes from another Latin word, it's related, legare, meaning to bind. And the whole...
Like a ligament.
Like a ligament, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Like a ligament that holds something together. The idea is that, properly understood, if a law reflects the true, the good, or the beautiful, something just, it binds your conscience automatically without force. Now, most people follow the law. Why do you not speed? Why do you not blow through the red light or whatever? Because you don't want to get a ticket. And that's okay. That's not a bad reason to do it. But that's really an argument of force. Like someone is going to force me against my will if I do these things. But properly understood, why do people not blow through a red stop sign? Well, a stop sign enforces a morality, right? People get the idea that if I blow through the stop sign or the red light, I'm going to kill someone, possibly, or myself. And so they get the morality of it. So they accept it, they understand it.
Wonderful. Now, does the Bioethics Defense Fund get involved in matters at the other end of life types of decisions and medical decisions?
We do. Since the Supreme Court has basically avoided so far a Roe v. Wade of assisted suicide and said there's no federal constitutional right to assisted suicide except for the states, and about 4 or 5 states now have allowed assisted suicide. We do a lot of work at the end of life, but mainly it's giving talks. It's helping people understand why at the end of life what people need is, as what we need at all stages of life, is to love and be loved. We don't want to use and be used. And we should not treat someone who's elderly or dying even with contempt and saying, well, your life has no meaning anymore. Therefore, we always say, people on the other side of this issue who want assisted suicide or euthanasia say, you should have the right to die with dignity. Well, it's kind of a funny term, the right to die, because the reality is, whether we have a right or not, we all are going to die. But what we're worried about is that the so-called right to die will eventually morph into the duty to die. So what starts out as an argument, well, this person shouldn't suffer, becomes, well, what happens, the cheapest way to solve the healthcare crisis would be to say, well, after a certain age, everyone, you've had a good life, and you're going to be expensive now, and you really can't do anything for society. So we're just going to ask you to take these pills and do your duty and die. That's a danger, right? I mean, the truth about protecting life is this: if we dehumanize or we disrespect human life at any stage of existence, all the other stages are at risk too.
Let's take that end of life type of issue, and let's think about a doctor or a nurse who's caring for an elderly person, maybe in an institution, and they reportedly feel some pressure on rationing medical care and whether or not to provide medical care, or whether or not to have unilateral do not resuscitate orders or this kind of thing. Have you gotten involved in terms of lecturing on conscience rights as they relate to medical professionals?
Well, that's certainly a big issue. It started out with, say, the abortion issue. Well, you don't have to have an abortion, just let us have one. But now it's become, well, not only should you let us have an abortion, but you have to participate or you have to pay for it. And so doctors and nurses of conscience who say, I think this is equivalent to murder or it is murder, I don't want to participate, yes, we've heard that sometimes they feel pressured. Now, it's interesting to see in the next few years what happens if a case gets to the Supreme Court about how far can a professional go. It seems to me it's a misunderstanding of the idea of profession. So lawyers, we're both lawyers, and physicians are professionals. Well, what does that mean? Well, professional, you get education, you have a lot of experience, and then why do people pay doctors or lawyers? For their judgment. you should do this, in my opinion, or you shouldn't do this. So it's really a strange and undercutting of the idea of professions to tell doctors or nurses or others, you have to do this, even if it's against your conscience. But wait a minute, the reason you hired me, or the reason you contracted with me, is for my judgment. But now you're telling me, so I always tell doctors that, I don't know what the history is of the term provider. I'm a medical provider. But I think that's a dangerous term because if you're a medical provider, then it's easy for people to think, well, provide me whatever I want. What you should say is, I'm a medical professional. And what I bring to the table is my judgment after years of training and years of experience. And I offer you my best judgment. And if my judgment is you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it ties back into what you were saying about the morality issue, too. Nick, I know that back in August, the National Institute of Health announced that it intended to lift the restrictions on taxpayer funding of embryo research, which involved using a human embryo and an animal embryo, the so-called chimeras. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Right.
Because many people find that just to be very shocking. Oh my God, combining an animal and a human embryo.
Right. So the UK was the first country that I know
United Kingdom.
The United Kingdom, England, to say we were going to create animal-human chimeras. We're going to put them. So they started out with 99% human and 1/10% animal, and for different reasons, which we don't have to go into right now. And so, of course, some scientists, again, people who think, well, if we can do it, we should, and they have different reasons. We can study the developing embryo better this way, or we don't have a shortage of human eggs. We can do it this way. But the big concern, of course, is what happens if you were to go even beyond that? So that's bad enough, but how about if it's 50-50 someday? A true hybrid is 50-50. So these are concerns that, again, just because we can do it, the moral question is, should we do it? And most people, of course, haven't even heard of chimeras, and they don't even know how to get their minds around it.
Well, there's a lot of distractions in the world today, and it's easy, and it's difficult to get down to the nitty-gritty, down into the real substance of these debates, but it's essential, really, that the population do study these, and it's very important that people like yourself who have dedicated their lives to this study educate us in a way that we can make informed decisions on this. And that's why you coming up to this area is so valuable to us, and we want to thank you. We're running out of time. It's flown by. I wonder, could you tell the viewers how they might learn some more about the Bioethics Defense Fund? And let me put in that you are a nonprofit organization and that you do accept donations.
Well, that's very kind of you. You can go to our website, www.bdfund.org, BD Fund for Bioethics Defense Fund. And if we don't know the answers and someone emails us a question, we know lots of people who we can pass on the question to. So we're lawyers. We learn a lot from our science advisors and our medical advisors who teach us the medicine and science, and then we try to put it in terms that the average person can understand. Because, again, we're all affected by this brave new world.
Well, it really is a terrific website. I've gone there several times, and I encourage you to go there, and I encourage you to consider helping to fund this very valuable work that the Bioethics Defense Fund does. And Nick, I want to thank you very much for coming by. It's been a delight to have you as a guest, and please keep up the good work. And thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Hello, and welcome to Life Matters, where we interview guests who protect human life from conception to natural death. I'm Colby Mazzarella. Welcome to the show. Our guest today is attorney Thomas Harvey, who is organizing a petition drive for an amendment to the Massachusetts State Constitution. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Well, thanks, Colby.
Thanks. So you have a petition drive going, and first of all, what's the big issue? I know it's a huge project. What is so important that it's worth working on it like that?
Well, I think that most people in Massachusetts, including pro-life people, don't realize that for the past probably almost 40 years, their tax dollars have been paying for abortions. Most people think that doesn't happen because of the Hyde Amendment, but
Well, what's
the
that?
Hyde Amendment is a law passed by Congress, and it only affects federal funding for abortion as opposed to state funding.
So really right now, for many years, federal funds cannot go for abortion.
Yeah, each year it has to go before Congress, and they renew the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding for abortion except in the cases of rape, incest, and life of the mother. But otherwise, those federal funds are prohibited to go for abortion. Now, they do go to places like Planned Parenthood. It's just that Planned Parenthood can't use those federal funds for abortion. They use them for other purposes, and that frees up money to use for abortion. So since money is fungible, I think it has a limited effect.
In other words, Planned Parenthood has a certain amount of money from other sources, and they say, well, we'll use that money for abortion because we have the federal money for other expenses.
Exactly. But in Massachusetts, what has been happening is for indigent women, poor women, they can go to a place like Planned Parenthood or any abortion clinic and get abortions essentially for free to be paid for by the Massachusetts tax dollars. So that has been going on for many, many years. And in 1981, the Supreme Judicial Court found that not only is abortion in Massachusetts a fundamental right, but that also it's a constitutional right that it be publicly funded.
Wow, so that's really different from the federal constitution.
Exactly.
Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, today's guest is a mother of 4 children and founder and director of Northern Ireland's leading pro-life group. In 1997, she founded Precious Life after viewing a picture of a baby killed by abortion. Well, welcome, Mrs. Bernadette Smith.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm delighted to speak to you from Ireland. As a voice for the unborn child, and I know many of the listeners will be in agreement that this is a worldwide struggle and we have to unite. And I'm here to tell you about the threat to Ireland to legalise abortion.
Bernadette, can you give us a little bit of the history between Ireland, England, Northern Ireland? What's gone on and what are some significant...